All right, if you're revising for your IGCSE history exam, you know that Treaty of Versailles is a huge topic. Well, this explainer is going to break down everything you need to know to absolutely nail that question.
Okay, let's get right into it. This is the big question, right? The one you really need to get your head around for the exam. Was the treaty a fair and just end to the First World War? Or was it so harsh, so humiliating, that it basically just lit the fuse for an even bigger, even more terrible conflict?
So our goal today is simple. We're going to give you all the key knowledge you need to turn that rag sheet completely green for this topic. We'll dig into what the peacemakers wanted, the exact terms of the treaty, the furious reaction to it, and the whole historical debate, so you can build your own top-grade arguments with confidence.
So, here's our game plan. First, we'll step into the shoes of the peacemakers themselves. Then, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the treaty's terms. After that, we'll explore Germany's reaction, weigh up the arguments for and against fairness, and finally, get you ready to form your own sharp historical judgment.
Okay, let's begin. Before we can even start to judge the treaty, we have to understand the incredible pressure and the totally clashing demands that world leaders were facing in Paris back in 1919.
This cartoon from 1919 just nails the problem perfectly. I mean, look at them. The Allied leaders, the big three. They're all trying to stir these completely different ingredients into one single pot called peace. You can just see it was a messy, complicated, and almost impossible recipe to get right. And here you see the clash in human form. On one side, you've got America's President Woodrow Wilson, the idealist. He's pushing for a fair peace, talking about his 14 points and a new League of Nations. But on the other side, you've got France's Prime Minister George Clemenceau. This guy had seen Germany invade his country twice in his lifetime. He wasn't interested in ideals. He wanted revenge. He wanted Germany so weak it could never, ever attack France again. These two visions were just polar opposites.
So, how did those completely different visions get hammered into the actual words of the treaty? Let's break down exactly what Germany was forced to sign up to.
For your revision, it is incredibly helpful to group the terms into these 5 key areas. Think of it as a really simple way to remember all the different punishments Germany faced.
Now, at the very heart of it all was Article 231, the infamous war guilt clause. This was the absolute foundation of the whole treaty. It forced Germany to accept 100% of the blame for starting the war. For the Germans, this was an unbelievable national humiliation, but for the Allies, it was the moral justification they needed to make Germany pay for everything.
Next up, the military. Germany's once mighty army was slashed to just 100,000 men. They were forbidden from having any tanks, any submarines, or any air force at all. And the Rhineland, a key industrial area right on the border with France, had to be completely demilitarized. Germany was effectively left defenseless. And this map just shows you the sheer scale of the land they lost. Germany lost 10% of its land and 12.5% of its population, including really important industrial areas. Just look at the Polish corridor. It literally cuts Germany in two, just so the new country of Poland could have access to the sea.
So you've got a country that's been blamed for everything, disarmed, and literally carved up. It's really no surprise that the reaction inside Germany was one of absolute horror and fury. They didn't call it a treaty, they called it a dicta.
This newspaper quote from 1919 just captures that mood perfectly. There's no talk of peace here, is there? It's all about shame and vengeance. And this feeling was summed up in that one crucial word, diktat. You gotta know this term. It means a dictated peace. The Germans weren't invited to Paris to negotiate. They were just handed the terms and told to sign on the dotted line or face invasion.
So let's just lay out their objections really clearly. The fury started with it being a diktat. The war guilt clause was seen as a total lie and a national insult. They were terrified the reparations would completely destroy their economy. The disarmament felt so unfair when nobody else was doing it. And, maybe worst of all, millions of German-speaking people were now being forced to live in other countries, which totally went against Wilson's big idea of self-determination.
But as good historians, we have to challenge this. Was the German reaction just, well, sour grapes? Let's look at the other side. The arguments that the treaty was actually fair, or at least the best they could do under the circumstances.
You have to remember the public mood in 1919. I mean, after 4 years of brutal war and millions of deaths, people in Britain and France were just not in a forgiving mood. This quote shows a really common feeling, that Germany was getting exactly what it deserved, and frankly, maybe the punishment should have been even tougher.
These are the key arguments for your essays. First, look at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The peace that Germany had forced on Russia just a year earlier was way, way harsher than Versailles. Second, Germany's economy, while it was damaged, was actually in better shape than France's, since the war wasn't fought on German soil. And finally, you could argue that with the Allies wanting such different things, this treaty was the only realistic compromise they could have ever agreed on.
Okay, now let's flip it around. Let's look at the powerful arguments that the treaty was fundamentally unfair and, a long-term disaster just waiting to happen. This quote from the historian Zara Steiner just nails the central problem. The treaty fell into this dangerous trap. It was harsh enough to make the Germans furious and desperate for revenge, but it wasn't actually harsh enough to stop them from one day being able to get that revenge. It tried to do two opposite things at once: punish and make peace, and it ended up failing at both.
So the core arguments against fairness are pretty clear. The war guilt clause was historically very questionable. The final reparations figure was seen as impossibly high. Forcing millions of Germans into new countries was a clear violation of President Wilson's own principles. And by dictating the peace, the Allies created this deep well of injustice that future extremists could and would exploit.
All right, we've walked through both sides of the debate, the case for fairness and the case against. Now it's time to bring all of this together so you can build your own final, evidence-based judgment.
Honestly, think of this slide as your essay plan, all ready to go. On the left, you've got the arguments for fairness. On the right, the arguments against. The very best answers won't just pick a side. They'll use points from both columns to explain exactly why the treaty was, and still is, so incredibly controversial. And that is really the final takeaway. There is no simple right or wrong answer here. Was it a reasonable attempt at peace in impossible circumstances? Or was it a vengeful act that pretty much guaranteed another war? Your job as a historian is to use all the evidence we've covered to build your own convincing argument and back it up. That's how you're going to smash this question.